Officer Harris's hand moved for the backpack before his voice did. The neon over the pumps hummed like a held breath. Daniel felt the folded paper in his coat as if it were alive. Headlights cut the dark. Rebecca had arrived. She showed a card, and the officer's face went hard, then suddenly pale. In that small, shocked silence, a hidden book of names began to tilt. What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me, this is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. The folded paper felt thin and too warm in Daniel's palm, as if it had kept some small, secret heat. He smoothed it with a pat of his thumb and read the short message again. Don't answer questions. Ask for my name. Breathe. R. Outside, the night had the flatness of an old photograph. No movement except for the slow tremor of the highway lights and the occasional ripple of a car that cut the dark and went away. The gas station's canopy threw a square of harsh light over the pumps. Its neon sign buzzed like an insect, half bright, half tired. The smell of gasoline mixed with something sweeter, burnt coffee, someone's cigarette stub, the faraway promise of rain. Daniel kept the paper folded and close to his breast like a secret blessing. He had put the jacket on because the air was cold, but mostly because he liked the way the felt of the cloth made him smaller, as if a coat could fold him in and protect him from the long view of other people's eyes. He was 17 and watched the world with a kind of careful irritation. The slow, patient patience of someone who had learned the distance between what could be said and what had to be survived. He straightened the strap of his backpack. Inside were two things he considered precious: the old camera he had saved for and a composition notebook where he wrote applications and small plans. The camera was dull with fingerprints. The notebook's edges were soft from being turned and returned. He had taken pictures of roofs and gutters and the way light fell across hands. Photographs felt honest in a way people often were not. A soda machine rattled in the corner. A man in a high-visibility vest laughed too loudly on the phone behind the glass door of the convenience store. The clerk's face, lit by the register, had the hollow, patient tiredness of someone who had seen too many faces in one life. Daniel watched the clerk watch him and felt the same small prickle he felt whenever a stranger's gaze tracked him, without the courtesy of human curiosity. He had learned how to be ordinary so it would not look like anything at all. He remembered what his mother had told him the first time she had sat him down at the kitchen table and looked at him with a softness that had the weight of warning. Daniel, Rebecca had said, people will make pictures of you that are not you. Don't let them sell you a lie. She had packed her words carefully, like medicine. She worked different hours now, late shifts and early mornings, and the house hummed with her footsteps. Rebecca's hands were strong. They had, for years, kept him steady. The folded paper was in her handwriting. That fact made his pulse quicken and then steady again, like a metronome. He tried to hold in his chest the feeling of wanting to be somewhere else. A classroom lit with winter sun. A studio where the click of the camera shutter was the only sound. Anything that would stop the night from pressing close. The town had particularities. A river that cut clean through it, a strip of small shops. The same police cruiser that went by at odd hours and made him tighten his jaw. People said small things in big ways. He felt those undercurrents. Daniel's phone buzzed in his pocket. He took it out with a practiced slowness and saw his mother's name on the screen. He didn't answer immediately. He read the message instead. Be home before midnight. Don't take the bus down Oak. Call me when you get there. Be careful. Mom. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to tell her about the scholarship essay he was drafting, about the teacher who had said his photographs had a good eye, about the way the principal had looked at him the week before and offered a half-hearted smile. But some things were safer kept folded like that small paper now. Truth turned and reshaped itself around other people's needs. He had learned to hold the safe pieces, to hand the heavy ones only to those who could carry them. The neon above the pumps flickered. Across the street, a cruiser idled with its lights off, a dark shape in the night. The driver sat motionless, a shadow, behind glass, and it felt to Daniel like a small, watched pulse. He had seen that shape before. He had learned that the quiet in a car sometimes held a patience that could swell into something else. He felt a familiar, low tightening at the base of his neck, the kind that arrived when he knew he was being noticed in a place where noticing resembled danger. From the corner of his eye, Daniel saw a man move from the pump toward the store. He was heavy-shouldered, hair cropped short. He had the look of someone used to being noticed and making others small by the simple gravity of his presence. Daniel's hand tightened around the paper. The man's jaw was square, and when he turned his face, there was a flash of badge on his belt. The man was a police officer. Officer Harris, if the town's small talk had it right. The narrator could have said that the approaching officer meant nothing, just a man doing his job, because on paper that was an easy thing to say. In the quiet honesty of the night, however, small things gathered weight. The officer's step was even measured. His eyes did not search, they held. Daniel's body remembered other encounters. Raised voices folded into late-night clouds, a car window lowering too slowly, a siren that had seemed to come from inside his chest. Memory, once it settles, has the stubborn resilience of roots. He drew a breath and felt the paper crumple under his fingers. Don't answer questions. Ask for my name. Breathe. He tried the breathing Rebecca had shown him. The slow inhale. Hold. The exhale that was meant to steady a flaring pulse. It helped for a moment. The convenience store hummed with fluorescent light. A thin, electric day in a town that folded itself in the dark. The officer's shadow fell across the pump islands. He stopped a few feet away and looked at Daniel with a measured, almost clinical gaze that did not carry the weight of curiosity, but the weight of inventory. The man's mouth was a line. When he spoke, his voice was even practiced. You closing up, he asked, but the words were less on the surface than the subtext. Why are you here? Who are you with? The questions he did not voice crowded the space. Daniel could have said yes. He could have said anything. He had rehearsed small answers like tools exactly for nights like this. He felt the paper in his pocket as an anchor. He kept his voice light, though the lightness felt thin, sometimes soon to tear. Just finishing up, sir. Waiting on a ride. Officer Harris's eyes moved to the backpack against Daniel's leg. You a student? Yeah. Senior, Daniel said. The word felt honest and precise. The officer nodded the way someone notes facts on a pad. Where are you headed? A bus stops 2 streets down. A friend's place. The answers could be any of those things. Daniel thought of the essay he had been staring at for weeks on end. Words about light, shadows, and the way people carry their past like water in a jar. He thought of his mother's hands, of the folded paper between them. He tasted fear, not sharp, not all-consuming, but a low, steady ache measured by practice and time. Outside, the wind shifted and sent a sheet of trash skittering across the asphalt, a paper ghost that tapped the pump. The neon sign hummed. The night kept its pattern. The observer would have seen 2 people standing under a cheap canopy, a small stage of ordinary life. The one thing that separated them was a history written in small, invisible ink. The history of who had the right to be seen and who had to be careful about that very being. Daniel's fingers found the edge of the paper in his pocket. He did not show it. He folded his hands like a person at a church pew, steady and deliberate. He kept his voice level. My mom will pick me up here. She's running late. Rebecca had taught him how to speak like a person who did not make waves. She had also taught him, in a voice soft and direct, to name her if things went wrong. Her name was a key. It opened things, it explained them. It made men stop and reevaluate the small, simple maps they had drawn for themselves. The officer's face did not change at the name. It was as if the sound traveled through him and left no mark. Yet there was a moment, quiet and quick, where the man's eyes flicked somewhere beyond Daniel, toward the cruiser, toward the dark windows across the street, and something like calculation passed over his features. The thing that passed between them in that thin slice of time carried with it the promise of more, questions that would not stay small, hands that could be heavier than expected, and the fragile, ridiculous hope that the night might bend to the small secret heat of a folded paper in a coat pocket. Daniel straightened. He had not planned how long he would wait. He had not planned the shape of the night beyond its immediate need, to get home, to get inside, to close a door. But plans shifted when larger things pressed against them. The note in his pocket was both a map and a warning. The town's light kept buzzing overhead, indifferent. Rebecca's message had asked him to be home before midnight. It was 30 minutes until midnight. The small clock above the store's door ticked on, and Daniel counted the beats like a chest, steady and finite. A car passed on the highway and left a line of sound that faded into the dark. He kept the paper folded, a thin, private heat close to his heart. The officer's hand moved before his voice did, the quick, practiced motion of someone who had rehearsed small violences until they felt like routine. He reached toward the backpack with an authority that did not ask permission. Daniel felt the breath leave him as if someone had pinched the air from his lungs. It was the same thin panic he had felt in other small moments when being seen turned into being singled out. "Hands where I can see them," Officer Harris said. The words were measured, the sort of language that sounded like procedure but carried the weight of accusation. The other man at the pump, an older patrolman leaning half in the cruiser, shifted and watched with an expression that had no mercy in it. His eyes were the kind that read a person as numbers on a checklist. Daniel's fingers found the folded paper in his pocket. He could feel the creases through the fabric. Don't answer questions. Ask for my name. Breathe. R. The instruction had become an anchor in a night that pulled at him from every side. He did not move his hands quickly. Quickness could be read as guilt. "Do you have an ID?" Harris asked. His question had the same cadence as someone who already knew the answer he wanted to hear. Daniel kept his voice steady. "Yes." He put his hands where the officer could see them and reached for his wallet. His pulse sounded in his ears like a second voice. The night smelled of petrol and old coffee and rain that had not come yet. The hum of the neon sign seemed suddenly very loud, a constant that measured the seconds. Harris took the ID and glanced at it. There was no hesitation in his fingers, only the sort of quick scan that cataloged. "You live around here?" "Close," Daniel said. "My mom, she'll pick me up." "Name?" Harris asked. The question was casual but precise, a box to be ticked. "Rebecca Martin," Daniel said, because the folded paper told him to name her. Speaking her name felt like a spell. It was a name that meant home, warm hands, the smell of lemon cleaner in the kitchen. It was also the name that opened doors. The officer's eyes twitched. For a beat there was something like recognition, or maybe it was calculation. The older patrolman shifted in the cruiser, and the radio on the dashboard hissed, a small static song that made Daniel's skin crawl. Harris kept his hand on the wallet as if to anchor himself. "Are you waiting for a ride?" Harris asked again. "Yes," Daniel said. He did not try to explain the camera or the composition book. Explanations of that kind felt fragile when authority decided to press. He tried to breathe as his mother had taught him, the slow in and out that was supposed to iron out panic. The breath helped for a second, and then not. The officer stepped closer, a polite invasion. "You got anything illegal in the bag?" His tone had the polite cruelty of a man who enjoyed setting a trap and then watching someone walk into it. "No," Daniel said. He knew what would happen if he lied. He had seen it on faces in the grocery store, at school, in the rear view of a car that drove by too slowly. The cost of lying was measured in longer things than immediate freedom. He kept his hands visible. Harris's gaze shifted to the camera slung among Daniel's things. You taking pictures at night? Taking pictures of people. Sometimes roofs. Light. Daniel's words were small, careful. Ever take pictures of police? Harris asked. The question was not innocent. It was a probe designed to unsettle. No, Daniel said. He felt exposed. The city's lights traced thin lines on his skin. Above them, the sky was a dull bowl. The patrolman in the cruiser turned the engine off and killed the small hum of the world. For a moment, only the neon and the distant highway remained to measure time. Then the sound of tires and a car door, urgent, hurried, cut through the night. A sedan pulled into the lot, headlights carving a white path across the asphalt. Daniel's heart leapt. His breath shortened. He told himself to keep still. The folded paper told him to ask for a name, and that meant if his mother came, the sound of her voice would be the thing to hold. Rebecca stepped out of the car, cheeks flushed from a cold or from speed, or both. In the harsh overhead light she looked older and unexpectedly small and enormous at once. Small because of the thinness of her jacket and the tired set of her shoulders. Enormous because of the steadiness in her eyes when she saw Daniel. She moved with a tired efficiency, hands practiced at doing things under pressure. Daniel said her name, not because he needed to, but because saying it made something true. Rebecca's gaze flicked to the officer. For a moment her face registered nothing more than the normal caution of someone stepping into a scene where her child was being questioned. Then something else happened. A small, sharp tightening around her mouth, as if she had remembered an old argument and tasted copper on her tongue. She walked the last few steps with a purpose that made the air between them change. The officer straightened out of habit and straightened again, as if posture might make his authority less liable to crumble. He held out the wallet, still in his hand. Daniel watched the exchange with a thinning veil of fear. Rebecca reached into her coat like a woman who kept instruments ready. Her gloved hand produced a card, thin, official, inside a leather sleeve. She did not announce what it was. The light caught the edge of a seal that was familiar and foreign at once. A small emblem, circular and serious. The kind a person sees in rooms with high ceilings and finds impossible to ignore. Rebecca extended the card without flourishing. Her voice was calm, the sort of low tone she used when she needed things to stay simple. Officer Harris, she said. This is my son, Daniel Martin. We're waiting for a ride. Harris's face changed while the word left her mouth. The shift was tiny, almost imperceptible, a pour of heat across his cheeks, the way a mask slides and allows a sliver of what's beneath to show. He looked at the card, and then at Rebecca, and then at the cruiser, as if trying to solve a puzzle he had not known existed. For the first time, his hand faltered. The older patrolman watched without expression. The night bent in on itself, like a held breath. Daniel felt both relief and something colder. The card did what Rebecca had intended. It made Harris stop. He stepped back, slow, as if removing a hand from a hot surface. But what followed was not simple gratitude or a smooth retreat. Harris's eyes hardened in a way that made Daniel's skin go cold. He smiled too quickly, a twitch of a thing that did not reach his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, returning the card as if he'd been handed a triviality. "We're just doing our jobs." Rebecca folded the card back into her coat with the practiced ease of someone who carried weight and knew how to place it. Her fingers brushed the leather like a woman touching a familiar wound. There was a flicker across her face, something Daniel could not name then but would later recognize. The sign of a person who had chosen to carry power, and the knowledge that carrying it meant compromises waited at the edges. The older officer stepped out of the cruiser and walked around the lot as if to survey the terrain. He glanced once at Harris and once at Rebecca and then looked away. The radio in his pocket clicked softly. Daniel could hear a crackle from the dashboard that might have been static or might have been a voice. In the small pause, a new thought grew in him. The badge had stopped Harris, but not entirely. It was as if the card had touched some old calculus between them, and their brief standoff left a remnant, an unspoken ledger. As they stood beneath the humming neon, the night felt different. It was no longer simply a space between one small life and the next. It was a stage that had been shifted. The rules had subtly changed. Rebecca's card had made the immediate danger shimmer and recede, but it had also introduced a new variable. Her power, visible and private, did not simply protect. It rearranged obligations, loyalties, and debts. Daniel watched his mother's jaw set as she took him by the elbow and guided him to the car. Her hand was warm and familiar, but her palm had the small tension of someone bracing for a weight they already knew. He wanted to ask her what the card had been, to ask why the officer had faltered like that, to ask what the cost of that hesitation might be. He wanted, too, to believe that the card solved everything. The narrator at this moment noted both the tenderness of the exchange and its ironies. Power, when brandished, often freezes only the surface of things. It left deeper currents moving, currents that could either carry them to safety or drag them into unknown waters. The card had produced a pause, and in that pause history had the space to whisper. There were names to be remembered, debts to be kept, and choices that might not look like choices when the time came. Rebecca closed the car door behind them with a muted click. Daniel's heartbeat slowed, but the sound of it stayed with him, a drum beneath his ribs that would not go quiet. The night kept its neon hum. The clerk inside the store resumed his half-loud conversation. Harris walked back to his cruiser and sat, hands folded on the steering wheel as if to note the hour. The older patrolman watched the car pull away, and for a second his gaze lingered on Rebecca's retreating profile, as if there was something at play between her and Officer Harris that had been written long before tonight. The small, private heat of the folded paper in Daniel's pocket pressed against his thigh. He had been given an immediate reprieve, but the reprieve felt like a doorway opening onto a corridor he had not planned to walk. Somewhere in the night, old allegiances prepared to test new truths. Morning came like a careful apology. Light found its way through the slatted blinds and cut the kitchen table into pale bars. Rebecca moved with the small, competent motions of a person who had married routine to survival. Kettle on, 2 mugs in the sink, lunchbox folded and tucked for later. The house smelled of lemon cleaner and the faint, honest tiredness of someone who had worked a graveyard shift. Daniel watched her from the doorway, the paper still folded somewhere under his shirt like a secret muscle. "You okay?" Rebecca asked, not looking up. Her voice was low in the way it always was when she wanted to keep the room steady. Daniel shrugged and crossed his arms. He felt older somehow. The night cut into him and left tiny notches. "Yeah, just tired." Rebecca slid a mug to him. Her hand brushed his like an apology and a promise at once. "You didn't tell me everything last night," she said. He didn't want to tell me. He also didn't want her to know how small he had felt when Harris's hand went toward his pack. He had learned to read weight in a look and to hold pieces of himself back. "It's fine," he said. "You handled it." She paused at the stove. For a second the surface of her face showed a fatigue that felt like a map of old collisions. "I handled it," she repeated, but the words sounded empty to her. She had a card that made a man step back, and that fact rode her like a tool she was always balancing. Sometimes the tool saved them. Sometimes the tool invited trouble. Rebecca worked in a place that taught people to carry authority like an instrument. She had a file in a drawer with names that never left her mouth at the kitchen table. Daniel knew only pieces. She had training, she had contacts, and she had left a life once, and then stepped back into something that made her evenings full of quiet calls. He resented the neatness of her control, even as he took comfort in it. It made him feel both safer and silenced. At school, Daniel moved through corridors that smelled of polish and adolescent perfume, cameras slung like a promise across his shoulder. His friend Michael waited by the lockers, hair askew, a grin that was more habit than joy. You look like you've got a secret worth selling, Michael said, bumping Daniel's shoulder. Daniel tried to keep his mouth light. Just got home late. Cops bothering you? Michael's voice dropped the way it always did when he wanted raw truth and did not trust the world to give it. He knew things, who dated who made who laugh. He had a loyalty that was loud and unafraid. Daniel hesitated. He thought of the folded paper in his jacket and then of his mother's card that made Officer Harris back off. Nah, he said. All good. Michael's face didn't settle. He had this way of holding a look until the other person gave him something to work with. You sure? I can come with you. We can sit at the library after school. My mom doesn't like me out late either. There was a tenderness in Michael's offer that felt like sunlight. Daniel nodded. Thanks. Come by after class. I want to show you some photos. In art class, Mr. Allen set out prints like small countries on a table and watched them like a man who kept his hands folded to avoid reaching. Light is honest, he told them. It doesn't lie. It chooses what to show. He moved among the students, touching a corner of a photo and letting his fingers say what his words would not. Daniel laid one of his photos down, a rooftop trembling under rain, a single window lit like a secret. Mr. Allen paused, and there was that warm, teacherly pressure of approval that felt like a small victory. This is good, Daniel, he said. You capture people by not trying to capture them. The compliment warmed something in Daniel he had not told his mother about. He wanted to be seen for more than the tension that folded him. He wanted to be visible in a way that was chosen, not assumed. He kept his gaze steady on the photo while a small knot of doubt sat in the back of his throat. The night had left marks that a camera could not always fix. After school, Daniel and Michael walked to the river, a strip of green that cut the town in half. They talked about small things, college brochures, a new camera lens Michael wanted to borrow, a teacher they both liked. The river moved slowly and honestly and seemed to carry away some of the heaviness for a moment. But Daniel's thoughts kept drifting back to Harris. The way the officer's eyes had narrowed after Rebecca showed the card, the quick smile that did not reach him. He wondered what had lived behind that smile. Michael noticed, as friends often do. What is it? He asked. Daniel told him about the card only in pieces. She showed a card. He stepped back. The sentence was small. Michael stopped walking. Your mom's with the FBI? Daniel flinched. He had not meant to say it out loud. For all the secrecy, the town carried rumors like a net. People think so, he said. He lied and then half-truthed. She has people she works with. She helps sometimes. Michael's face shifted. Envy had a trace in it, quickly covered up. That would be something, he said. My mom thinks anyone with a badge is a bad man. She watches the news too much. The men who wore uniforms were different things to different people. For Daniel, they had become a map of limits. For Michael, they were plot points in a world his mother narrated. The gap in their experiences was small and vast at once. Rebecca's day was a series of soft steps through loud rooms. She sat in a conference where names were spoken quickly and moved around like chess pieces. A man named Agent Roberts talked in clipped sentences about a paper trail and a file that had gone cold. Rebecca listened and answered in short, definite phrases. She had been trained to speak that way, authority as punctuation. When she stepped out into the hall, she found Mark Harris waiting by the stairwell. He had the posture of a man who thought the world owed him order. The two exchanged a look that held history. Words were unnecessary at first. The silence between them was a ledger. You stepped in last night, Mark said without preamble. His voice was careful, the kind that kept things near its chest. Rebecca's jaw tightened. She had done what she had to do to keep her son safe. I did, she said. I don't want him stopped for no reason. Mark's face didn't harden into anger so much as into something cooler. Harris here says he felt undermined, he said. He meant the other Harris, Mark's partner. He felt like a tool was taken away. Rebecca's hands found the strap of her bag. I showed my card because it was necessary. Mark's eyes flicked to a small emblem on her coat and then away. Necessary sometimes looks different to different people, he said. His words suggested secrets, old operations, favors given, and debts recorded. There was a memory between them like a score that hadn't been closed. Rebecca felt a pinch of something she did not have a name for, an old guilt, perhaps, or the memory of a promise she had made years before. Her work had not been clean. It never was. The choices she had made to keep her family safe had sometimes cost other people pieces of themselves. That was the calculus she carried in private. At home that night, after dishes and the soft thump of a news report low on the television, Daniel opened his composition book and found a margin scribble he had not written. Don't trust the card. The line was hurried, impatient, and it stabbed him with cold. He flipped the pages and found a pressed receipt with a name he didn't know. The small paper heat of the folded note in his coat seemed to grow warmer. Rebecca sat at the other end of the table and watched him with a guarded look. "Are you hungry?" she asked, but the words were surface. Her mind collided with the corridor of faces at work, with Mark Harris's tone, with an old file she kept hidden under lock. Daniel held the page against the light. "Whose are?" he asked. Rebecca's face went still. For a second she had the odd sensation of someone reading a ledger that had an entry for her and her name scrawled wrong. She forced a smile. "Probably just a kid writing nonsense," she said. Her voice held a small steel. But inside her, a new fear had come awake. The idea that power could be a beacon as easily as a shield. If someone had written "Don't trust the card," then either they had reasons rooted in truth, or they wanted to unsettle them. Either way, Rebecca felt the map of her life shift. She wanted to protect Daniel with every soft and sharp thing she had, but protection came with weights. That night, both of them lay awake in the small dark, thinking in different languages about the same thing, the shape of safety, the price of being seen, and the fact that a single card had changed how a man looked at them. The night kept its hush, but the hush contained new wires, threads that would pull later, gentle at first, and then raw. The discovery arrived like rain under a door, small, unwanted, and impossible to ignore. Daniel had planned to sort his photos that night, to turn the raw folders into something tidy for his portfolio. Instead, his hand closed on a brittle envelope tucked behind a stack of old receipts in the bottom of his mother's desk. The envelope was plain, the paper thin, and his name had been written on it once in a shorthand that made his chest tighten. Daniel, for when you ask. He carried it to his room like someone smuggling a secret. The lamp threw a small halo on the desk as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of photocopied paper, grainy with age. There were names, dates, and a list of locations. There was a photograph, too. Rebecca, younger, hair pulled back, eyes hard and bright, standing beside a man whose face Daniel knew like a bruise, Officer Mark Harris. In the photo, Harris's hand rested on the hood of a car. He smiled without warmth. Rebecca looked away from the camera as if she had been caught mid-step between two worlds. Under the photograph, a line in neat type, Operation Nightfall, case file. Beneath that, a list of charges and a note in Rebecca's handwriting. Target neutralized. Collateral minimized. Daniel's throat closed. His fingers trembled. He was not ready for the weight of the words. He pressed the paper to his chest and felt it beat against his skin like a second, accusing heart. He had, in his childhood, seen his mother's work as a kind of distant armor. She had training, contacts, and a card that made a man step back. He had always thought that armor was meant only for him, a shield she raised so he could live. The file unmade that story in a handful of sentences. If Rebecca had been part of an operation named Nightfall, then her card did not come from a single clean place. It was threaded into things that left people smaller on purpose. Daniel found the edges of his memory fraying. There was a face he could not place at first, then a name, Darius Lee. The name arrived like a cold wind. Darius had been a kid from the other side of town, someone who had played on the same worn court as Michael, someone whose mother had folded his uniforms in a neat, tired stack, and who had smiled with the kind of roughness that made you feel included even if you were not. Daniel had taken a photograph of Darius once, leaning against a chain-link fence, hair wet from sweat, the light making his teeth look like small islands. He remembered the night Darius did not come back. He remembered the whisper that came through school corridors, and the way some teachers' eyes went hard whenever his name was said. He had not connected that night to Rebecca's file until now. The photocopy lay like a bruise on his desk, target neutralized, collateral minimized. Daniel moved through the house like someone awake in a borrowed body. The kitchen smelled of cold lemon and the low hum of the refrigerator. Rebecca's chair was empty. He crossed to her small safe under the bottom drawer, found the key taped to the back of a recipe card, a mistake she had made once as a tired human, and opened it with hands that did not feel like his. Inside, among expense reports and a stack of passport photos, he found a ledger. The pages were full of names written in a neat, dispassionate hand. Next to some names were dates. Next to others, there were check marks. At the bottom of the ledger, in a line pressed harder than the rest, was one single sentence that everything else seemed to orbit. Harris cleared. File closed. Rebecca's name signed with a tilt that felt like a signature in blood. He did not mean to read his mother's private words. He had always been taught not to pry. But this was not prying. This belonged to him, now the way a wound belongs to the person who bears it. The note from R, "Don't trust the card," suddenly snapped into focus. It was not a stranger's paranoia. It had been a warning meant to crack open the veneer of safety. Rebecca came home late that night. The door clicked softly. Her silhouette filled the small hallway and then dissolved into the kitchen light. She moved like a woman carrying weather, cautious, precise, the sort of movements that practiced restraint to avoid setting off alarms. Daniel met her at the sink, the photocopy folded back into the envelope as if it were too hot to hold. His voice was small. "Mom." He did not call her Rebecca in moments like this. The name would have belonged to meetings and suits. He wanted the softness. He wanted the person who made him soup when he was sick. She looked at him and then at the envelope. For a beat her face did not change. Then something happened that he had not anticipated. She did not take the paper and explain. She did not reach for a hand on his shoulder. Her eyes moved like someone who had counted every outcome and was still surprised by one. "You found it," she said. Her voice was tight but steady. The kettle's whistle screamed like a small alarm in the room. "I was going to tell you when you were older." "Told me what?" Daniel asked. He did not want to hear the word betrayal, but it hovered at the edge of his mouth. Rebecca set down the mug she was making with a careful hand. "I used to work with people who prosecuted dangerous men," she said. The sentence could have been the beginning of a noble confession. But then she sighed, and the sound was not absolute. Sometimes those operations went wrong. "You were there with Harris," Daniel said. The words were simple and direct, a child's counting of pieces on a table. He looked at her, searching for the woman who had let him draw on the back of old tax receipts, the woman who had come home smelling of a building's cleaning fluid and the tiredness of a good day's work. Rebecca's face folded in the way a careful plan folds when you try to smooth it back into one piece. "We were partners on cases," she said. "On some we did good. On others there were choices to make. You handed him over names. You signed files closed." The accusation was not cruel in tone. It was a child trying to understand the shape of the adult world. She nodded. "Yes." The single word carried a gravity that made the kitchen feel smaller. "There were men who were bad, Daniel. There were things I saw, things I could not let continue. I thought I could work from the inside. I thought I could steer things away from harm." "And Darius?" The question ripped out of him like a live wire. Was he collateral? Rebecca's eyes filled then, and she blinked as if trying to force them back into the socket of reason. "Darius, we had intelligence that connected him to a ring," she said. "I believed it because I trusted the source." Her hands trembled. "I signed a file because I thought it would lead to bigger arrests, to shutting something down. The operation went wrong. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Daniel's world narrowed to the sound of his own breath. He had taken photos of Darius. He had seen Darius laugh. He thought of the way his mother had shielded him with that card. Now the shield and blade are blurred. "You lied to save me," he said. The sentence was heavy and honest. "You made deals." "Yes," Rebecca said. Her voice broke like old plaster. "I made deals I thought would protect us. I told myself it was for you. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's a thin thing to hang a life on." Outside, a car drove by and threw a transient light across the linoleum, an indifferent witness. Daniel felt betrayal like a stain that would not wash out. He had wanted to believe power could be a clean thing, a card that simply cleared the way. Instead, it had teeth and a ledger and a cost he had not seen until now. Rebecca reached for him then, and the gesture was human enough that it hurt him more. "I am sorry," she said. "I am sorry for Darius. I am sorry for what my choices did. I thought I could protect you. I thought I could fix things from the inside." The apology did not erase the ledger. It did not change the photograph where Harris smiled as if the world belonged to him. The note from R, "Don't trust the card," had been right in the way warnings are right. Precise, terrible, and late enough to hurt. Daniel folded the photocopy and slid it back into the envelope. The photos' faces looked small and big at once, buried under decisions made in rooms where names were spoken like currency. Trust had split into pieces. Some were whole, some were shards. In the dark, after Rebecca left to sleep, Daniel lay awake and thought of betrayal as a shape he had to learn to recognize. The first twist in the story was not a single action, but a slow unspooling. The safety he had been given was bought on someone else's loss. The thing that had paused Harris under the gas station light now revealed itself as part of a system that could stop and start people like machines. R remained a small, folded warning in his head. The name that wrote "Don't trust the card" had opened a new door. Behind it were corridors Rebecca had walked and rooms she had kept to herself. Daniel was a step into those corridors now, and the path forward would require decisions that might betray his mother or save his conscience. The blackness outside his window felt thicker, as if the town itself had shifted a few degrees and now faced him differently. The days that followed felt like walking along a shoreline after a storm. The surface looked the same, but underfoot the sand had shifted. Daniel moved through them, aware of every small change. The way a teacher's eyes lingered a beat too long. The way a police car now passed the school with its radio quieter than before. He found himself listening for sounds he had never paid attention to. A door closing in the next house, the odd stomp of a boot on the pavement, as if the world had learned a new language, and he had to pick up the letters. He tried to make things ordinary. He went to class. He passed photographs across Mr. Allen's table, and he laughed at Michael's jokes even when they landed flat. But inside him, a different conversation was happening. It was quieter than the argument and louder than I thought. It asked the questions that would not let him sleep. Do I protect my mother? Do I honor Darius's memory? Who is R? And why did they warn me? At night, Daniel replayed Rebecca's words and the photograph from Operation Nightfall. He folded and unfolded the photocopy in his hands until the paper was soft. The ledger's pen marks seemed to form tracks he could follow, if only he had the courage. He thought of Darius on the court, of the grin that had made the neighborhood feel bigger. He thought of the shock in Darius's mother's voice the day the town had learned her son was gone. Daniel had not gone to the funeral. He had not known how to clap politely for grief. Now he saw the absence Darius had left as something more than a missing person. It was a debt he suddenly felt he owed. Rebecca's world and Daniel's world began to press against each other like two plates of glass. At work, Rebecca sat in rooms where men and women spoke in clipped sentences and loaded phrases. Agent Roberts asked for timelines and wanted clarity. "We have to know who leaked the dossier," Roberts said. "If someone thinks she's compromised, it puts the whole field team at risk." Rebecca kept a neutral face. She had weathered doubts before. Her life had grown around them. But the ledger and the photograph had made the past sticky and thick. "I have nothing to hide," she told Roberts, and she sounded like someone who had rehearsed that sentence until the edges wore thin. Inside, a small voice asked if her past could ever be tidy again. Mark Harris began to change, too, though only in tiny, telling ways. He would arrive at the station early and stay late. He watched Rebecca sometimes at meetings with a look that held both calculation and something colder, like a ledger being closed. Once, when Rebecca walked past the squad room, he called her name and said, "We need to talk." His tone meant more than the words. Rebecca nodded and left with a steady step, and Daniel, who had happened to be nearby on an errand, felt the shift in the air like a glass breaking slowly. Daniel's internal conflict turned outward when Michael showed up at his door with news. "My cousin works at the town records office," Michael said, without preface, breathless. "He says nightfall was bigger than we thought. A few names, court files, sealed orders. People disappeared from official lists. He says Darius's file shows weird gaps." Daniel's hands tightened around the mug he held. The coffee tasted too sharp. "Gaps how?" he asked. "Like someone smudged out pages. Like they didn't want the story to be read." Michael's eyes were wide, a boy's hunger for truth that had not been tempered by fear. "You should see it. We should see it." They went together to the records office under the excuse of college forms. The man behind the desk took a long time, fingers moving over keys, while Michael's cousin, small, nervous, passed them a photocopy folded into a pocket. The pages were older, the ink feathering into paper like watercolors. There were stamps and signatures, and then white blank spaces where a paragraph had been. Where Darius's arrest or listing or some official mention might have been, there was empty paper. Daniel felt something in his chest break and then begin to beat a different rhythm. The gaps read like a pattern. Someone had tried to erase a thing. The thought that someone had used official power to make a life disappear tightened his grip on anger. It was not enough to be hurt. It needed a shape. It needed action. He wanted to act in the name of Darius. He thought of showing the photocopy to Darius's mother. He thought of going to the press. He thought of confronting Mark Harris in the open air of the station. Each idea arrived bright and terrible. Each choice demanded a price. The ledger Rebecca kept sat in his memory like a map with an X, and he could not tell whether he was being called to treasure or to ruin. At home, Rebecca noticed his distance. "You're different," she said one evening, folding a towel with slow care. The house felt quieter, as if someone had tuned down the volume. "You've been quiet." Daniel wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to hold the photocopy up and throw it like a stone into the pool of their lives. Instead, he watched her fingers, saw the way they moved, and wondered how much of her had been shaped by choices made before he was born. "I saw the records," he said finally. "There are gaps. Darius's file, there are missing pages." Rebecca's mouth went thin. She did not answer at once. Outside, a car passed, and the sound of its engine scraped in the air. "There are things they keep," she said slowly. "They keep them for reasons that can look like necessity. Some decisions were made with other things in mind." "You kept me safe by hurting someone else," Daniel said. The sentence was not a plea. It was accusation and question braided into one. "How do I live with that?" Her face changed in an instant from tired to very young, as if she had been briefly unmasked. She began, and then stopped, the right words failing under the weight of their cost. "I chose what I thought would keep you alive," she said. "I am sorry. I never wanted to." "You didn't have to sign off on people," Daniel said. The anger had a new edge now, not just betrayal, but the ache of justice denied. You called them targets. You wrote collateral minimized. Rebecca closed her eyes as if to push a blade back into place. Sometimes the field tells you a story that fits and you believe it because you want to end the harm, she said. Sometimes you're wrong. The next day, a note slid under their front door. It was thin, no envelope, and the words were sharp in black ink. Stay out of town records. R. The note landed like a loaded hand on Daniel's chest. R had warned him before, but now the voice felt different, less mysterious and more urgent. The town's small world had grown teeth. Someone was watching what he read, what he learned. The warning had the posture of a protective thing, and also the edge of threat. Daniel's choices multiplied, and each one stretched him thinner. He could go public and risk exposing Rebecca, which might protect Darius's name, but put his mother in a dangerous light. He could hide the truth and maintain the household's fragile safety. He could confront Mark Harris with nothing but a boy's photograph and a memory. He could follow R and hope the secret friend was a guide rather than another manipulator. At school, Mr. Allen stopped him in the hallway and looked at his face as if reading a map. "Be careful," he said quietly. The teacher's words were not a reprimand, but a small compass. Daniel nodded, and the nod held the tiredness of someone who had been given an impossible set of marching orders. Tension, once kindled, demanded fuel. Mark Harris's glances seemed to become notes in a score. Rebecca's quiet held more questions than answers. Michael's loyalty began to fray between courage and caution. The town itself felt like a living thing that could breathe hot or cold on command. Every small choice Daniel made, sending a message, showing a page, staying silent, felt like stepping onto a bridge that might drop away. In the nights that followed, when rain came and the world smelled like wet pavement and possibility, Daniel went down to the river with his camera. He took photographs of people with their heads bent, of hands folded, of the way a streetlight carved someone's face into two halves. The camera gave him a focus, a way to hold a thing without deciding its fate. He framed images that looked like questions and kept them in a folder he named D. They were quiet protests, soft as paper and sharp as a blade. He did not yet know which road to take. Each path led to risk. Each path led to truth that might burn. The choice pressed on him, a slow, relentless force. He felt the town watching, the ledger open, and the small, folded note from R like a fingerprint on his life. The tension had escalated into something that could no longer be paused. It demanded an answer, and the answer would not be gentle. They met at the old freight yard, where the town's light thinned into rust and rails, and the air smelled of oil and wet iron. Daniel's breath came out in white puffs. The bridge lamps stung his eyes. Rachel. R moved beside him, smaller than he had imagined and fiercer for it. She kept her hand on the strap of a battered satchel, fingers curled like someone who had learned how to hold a secret so it would not slide away. "This is it," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor at the edge that Daniel felt like a small stone shifting underfoot. "They meet here sometimes. It's where Harris thought no one would look." Daniel's camera hung from his neck like a talisman. He had brought more than pictures. Tucked into the pocket of his jacket was a small digital recorder he had bought with saved lunch money. Cheap, but enough to catch a voice. He had no plan for what would happen next beyond the fragile hope that truth might have weight enough to break what had been hidden. Michael arrived late, breathless and apologetic. He hugged Daniel quickly, avoidance in his eyes that Daniel couldn't read. "I'll watch the other side," he said. The last words landed in the air and then stuck there, as if they might mean more than anyone wanted. They waited in the shadow of a shipping container while a sedan rolled into the lot under the yellow glow of a street lamp. Harris got out first, shoulders set like a man used to making himself the center of gravity. And then, seconds later, Agent Roberts emerged from the passenger side. his suit dark and his face calm, as if he were stepping out to read a statement rather than to confront people who had names on the ledger. Rebecca appeared from the opposite direction, alone, moving with that precise urgency she wore like armor. Daniel saw her and felt every muscle in his body remember the night at the gas station. She came forward with both hands empty, but the badge on her coat caught the light. She looked at Harris, and something unreadable passed between them. History and hurt braided into a single bitter strand. Harris smiled first, a thin thing. "Rebecca," he said. The name was ordinary, the way one uses weather to fill awkward silence. "This is an odd place for a meeting." Rebecca did not answer. She stepped closer to Daniel as if she could use him like a shield. "You arranged this," she said to Roberts. "Why bring him here? Why now?" Roberts' voice was a low, controlled thing. "We wanted to talk about facts," he said. "We wanted to close the file." Daniel found a recorder inside his jacket and thumbed it on with fingers that felt suddenly foreign. He held it low, hidden by the camera strap. Rachel's hand found his, a quick, frightened pressure. Harris laughed then, but the sound had teeth in it. "Close the file," he echoed. "Some files get closed because the work is done. Others get closed because they're inconvenient." "You know what happened to Darius," Rachel said, stepping out of the shadow, as if her smallness could not contain the force of her grief. Her voice scraped like something pulled from a locked place. "He was not a target who deserved what you did. He was a boy." Harris's face went hard. "You don't know the whole picture," he said, an old defense a guard shield. Rebecca's hand found Daniel's shoulder then, and he saw the small, human weakness that came with being the one who had signed things closed. "We believed in intelligence," she said, and her voice broke like thin glass. "We thought it would lead to the ring. We were wrong." Robert's patience thinned. "We made choices in the field," he said. "Sometimes those choices have consequences. That doesn't make them a crime." Daniel felt something rise behind his ribs, anger and the need for a name to strike. "You buried pages." He said it plainly. "You erased Darius. You called it collateral." Silence pooled, heavy enough to drown in. For a heartbeat, nothing moved except the distant hum of a highway. Then Harris stepped forward, and the yard seemed to lean toward him. "You think you're the ones who can judge this?" he asked. He reached toward his coat as if for an ID, and movement, that small motion, brought the old, practiced panic back into Daniel's limbs. From behind a rusted crate came the sound of a phone camera clicking, and Rebecca moved faster than thought. She put herself between Harris and Daniel, palm out. "Don't you dare," she said to Harris, her voice a wall. "You will not touch him." The world tightened as Harris's hand hovered near his holster. Someone swore under their breath. Michael's shoulders jumped. Daniel caught the small, guilty tremor and felt something cold close over his heart. In the same motion, two headlights cut the lot, and men in plain clothes spilled out of a second car, backup or setup. Daniel could not tell. "Enough," Robert said. He eased forward with the kind of authority that suggested he had rehearsed how to end nights like this. "We don't need violence." Harris's face changed then in a way Daniel understood without being told. A ledger being closed, a score being settled. "I'm not the only one who keeps books," he said. "You think your badge shields you, Rebecca? You sign papers. You sign names away." At that, Rachel stepped forward, hand trembling but certain. She drew from her satchel a small envelope and let it fall to the gravel at Harris's boots. "You were paid," she said. "You and Roberts, paid to keep quiet about who really ran Nightfall. The ledger, payments, transfers, there are receipts." Harris bent to pick up the envelope, and a paper fluttered out. A printout Daniel recognized from inside Rebecca's safe, a line from a bank ledger with names and sums. The color left Harris's face. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. "From people who weren't allowed to forget," Rachel said. Her voice had the shape of someone who had grieved long enough to be fearlessly honest. "From Darius' mother. From others who lost everything. from files that were left to rot. Roberts moved then, a puppet master who had been cut loose, and found his strings. "You think pinning this on us will fix anything?" he said. "We did what needed to be done." Daniel stepped forward, angering a fire now rather than the slow ache it had been. "You did what you thought would protect something bigger," he said. "But you hid death. You erased a boy." Harris's hand went faster than Daniel expected. He reached for the envelope again, then up toward his own collar. A gun gleamed in his palm as if it had been waiting. There was a second, a lengthening, where Daniel thought the world might break. And then Michael moved. It was not the movement Daniel wanted. Michael's shoulder flicked, and the whisper of metal against leather was almost polite. He shoved his phone into Harris's hand. There was a smeared photo of Rebecca at a meeting with Roberts, an unclear angle, a partial ledger photo. "I told you," Michael said, voice small and shaking. "They were going to come after my cousin if I didn't help." Harris's face split, not into triumph, but into a look like a man who had been granted a way out he had not expected. "You did the right thing," he said, clapping Michael on the shoulder with a man's easy cruelty. The act read as betrayal in a language Daniel knew by heart. "You told him?" Daniel said. His voice was thin, and there was a new sound in it, grief sharpened to glass. "You told him about the meeting?" Michael's eyes closed as if to hold himself together. "They said they'd take my cousin from the records office. They said they'd make him disappear, same as Darius." He gasped. "I couldn't." Rebecca moved as if a rope had pulled her. She put her hands on Michael's shoulders, soft and fierce at once. "You should have told me," she said. Her voice was not fury at first, but a breaking. Harris shoved Michael roughly backward and leveled his gun, the motion practiced and ugly. For the first time, Daniel saw fear in Harris's eyes, not only because of the men around him, but because the ledger and the envelope and the recorder in Daniel's hand had shifted the game. Harris's authority had been a house of cards. Rachel's paper and Daniel's small recorder were wind. Roberts reached for his phone and called out orders. Men in plain clothes moved in tight, but the recorder in Daniel's jacket was on, and Rachel reached it with trembling fingers and said, "Play it." It was the thing they had all come for, the evidence Rachel had promised. A voice print of Harris, old and raw, candid in a bar months ago, boasting about a boy they had removed, and how files get stamped to keep problems from public light. The gravel seemed to roar as the recording played through Daniel's small speaker. Harris's voice, caught in a moment of casual cruelty, pushed into the night. "We made the problem small. We closed it. Nightfall did its work." Robert's voice answered, measured, and approved. Harris's face went pale as paper. He glanced at Roberts, who did not look surprised, only contained, as if he had predicted the weather. For a moment, the two men were men at the edge of a cliff, and the recorder was wind at their backs. Someone called the station then. Sirens were not far off, and in that instant Rebecca walked toward Harris and Roberts with a calm Daniel had not seen before. She held out both hands. "I will go in," she said. "I will tell you what I did. I will sign the ledger. But you have to let my son go." The world narrowed to the breath between her words and the time it took for Harris to choose. He blinked, the battle won, and the cost rewriting itself. Robert's jaw clenched. There was a calculation in his eyes that would not be easy to read. In a town like theirs, power often had bargaining power left even when evidence burned bright. Harris lowered his gun with a shaking hand. He nodded once, as if admitting to a verdict that had been inevitable. Men in plain clothes put on gloves and started to move. Michael sat down on the gravel and put his face in his hands, the betrayal written smaller and truer than any announcement. Rebecca stepped forward when the first officer reached for her cuff. She looked at Daniel, and she smiled with a softness that stunned him, a fierce, terrible love. "I did what I thought would keep you safe," she said. "I will live what comes. Just be you." Daniel's chest opened and closed like a bell. He held the recorder like it was a relic. Rachel came to him and hugged him tight, shuddering with something that looked like relief and grief braided together. Later, as headlights cut lines across the yard and officers made lists and read names into the dark, Rebecca was led away. The cuffs were not a final ending so much as a doorway. They were the shape of consequences, finally given a name. Harris and Roberts were taken to be questioned, their faces drained of the easy certainty that had once served them. Michael's betrayal sat between them all like a wound, and the price of it would be a story they would have to learn to live with. Daniel watched his mother walk into the light, then turned his face to the sky. Rain began like a fine whisper, then stronger, washing at the gravel with a sound that felt like absolution and like punishment at the same time. He turned the recorder off and tucked it into his pocket. The camera around his neck felt heavy and honest, full of images that now carried more meaning than they had before. He had wanted truth. The truth had come with a cost no one could have promised would be fair. As the town's loud lights moved and men exchanged lists and names, Daniel felt the world tilt and set itself again. The ledger would still be read, and the files would be opened. But for Darius and for the others, the reckoning was only beginning. The weeks after the freight yard moved with a kind of exhausted legal calm. Men in suits read lists into recorders. Paper flew between offices like small white birds. The town, which had been a quiet machine that hit its gears, began to show the places where it had been welded wrong. Files were unsealed. Names whispered in dark corners were written into official forms and given dates. There was no hurry toward neatness. Truth took its time, and when it arrived it came in small, careful steps. Rebecca's hearing was public. The room smelled of coffee and old varnish, and overhead lights hummed low like a congregation. She wore a plain sweater instead of a uniform, and in her hands she held a small stack of notes. Daniel sat near the back with Michael and Rachel, the recorder tucked into his jacket like a talisman. Michael's face had lines in it he did not have before, shame carved into a young body. But he sat steady when it mattered and spoke in a voice that trembled but told the truth. When the prosecutor read the ledger aloud, the room folded inward. Payments and transfers, names crossed through, files marked closed. Harris and Roberts were named again with dates, and the sound of their actions became ordinary when spoken this way. No more heroic edges, only the blunt business of consequence. Evidence Rachel and Daniel had brought forward fit into the official frame. It did not erase the hurt, but it stopped the smooth lie that had kept the hurt hidden. Rebecca stood and spoke. Her voice did not try to dress the past in justifications. She said what she had done and why she had convinced herself it would be right. She spoke of fear and of a mother's calculation, of how easy it was to believe that a single document could protect a child. She took responsibility in a way that made the room quieter and sharp. It was an act of courage and of penance both. Daniel watched her and felt many things at once, pride and a new, raw sorrow. He understood, for the first time, that love does not absolve action. A person's desire to protect can become a hand that closes someone else's life. The revelation hurt like cold rain. His mother's apology was a hand extended across broken glass. He did not take it like the simple thing it sounded. He took it like a heavy object, something to be set down carefully. Harris and Roberts faced charges. The town could not repair what had been lost, could not bring back lives folded into silence, but it could name those who had acted and hold them to account. Investigations broadened into other files. Men and women who had once believed they were serving the greater good were asked to recount the means by which they had tried to achieve it. Some of them answered honestly. Others faced the hard light and flinched. Darius's name returned to official pages with the small dignity of a corrected ledger entry. His mother, Grace, who had kept the photographs of her only son pressed between pages of a battered Bible, was there the day they reopened his file. She wore a gray coat and the face of someone who had been given an echo of the thing she wanted most, acknowledgement. Rebecca met her eyes in the hallway. and for a moment two women traded a look that held years of loss and a complicated sort of apology. Grace did not offer forgiveness in a phrase. She offered a small, steady nod that meant her grief had been seen. That was all the town could give at that moment, and it was enormous. The community gathered in small, awkward meetings. People who had never spoken publicly before learned how to say names without letting them sound like numbers. There were memorials held in the park where Darius had played, where boys now left basketball shoes and small notes. Daniel took photographs of these gatherings. Hands that pressed paper flowers into the earth, mothers who spoke into microphones with voices that were both cracked and fierce. His pictures kept the day from being simply a headline. They gave faces to a ledger. Michael's betrayal was complicated and became its own quiet court. He had been coerced, given threats against family he loved, and he had chosen the lesser of immediate harms. He confessed in private meetings and then in public testimony, where he told the truth about the pressure put on him. People did not forgive him at once. Some never did, but his willingness to speak and to carry the burden of that choice began the slow process of repair. He and Daniel lost the easy, unshaded friendship they had once had. They found a more honest, more brittle connection in its place. Rachel kept her distance after the hearings, but she did not vanish. She appeared at the memorial, where she and Daniel read names aloud with others. She stayed in the periphery, where grief and anger met, holding an envelope of photocopies like an offering. In private, she told Daniel that the note, "Don't trust the card," had been written because she had seen the pattern before. Small privileges traded for lives. Her own history had been a tangle of people she had tried to save and people she had failed to save. And in Daniel she saw a clean heart she wanted not to see corrupted by quiet bargains. The legal outcomes were only part of the story. Rebecca pled guilty to counts related to obstruction and abuse of power. She accepted a sentence that would include community service and oversight, and a period under supervision that would limit some of the authority she once held. She could have chosen silence and fought in court, but she wanted to lift some of the weight that had tied her to Chesterton, the way she had signed names closed, and letting the law name her errors felt like part of paying for them. She hoped, privately, for the chance to try to make amends in ways the papers could not measure. Daniel found that closure was not a single moment, but a collection of small acts. He visited Rebecca in a room where visitors sat behind glass. She smiled at him with a softness that still shocked him. There was a human warmth there even now. "I wanted you to be safe," she said. "But I see now safety can be stolen. I am sorry." Her hands trembled as she folded them. "It's not simple," Daniel said. The words came slowly. He felt a new steadiness inside him, an acceptance that justice and love could coexist without erasing each other. "I know," he said. "I'm angry. I'm proud. I don't know what forgiveness is yet." "That's fair," Rebecca said. She reached out against the glass, palm against his, and he mirrored it. The touch was cool and full of the history between them. Meals, scraped knees, the small ways she had kept the house whole. The world had not given them grace cheaply. They would have to learn to build it. Months later, Daniel organized a small exhibit in the library. He titled it simply, Names. He displayed photographs, Darius laughing on the court, Grace folding laundry with hands that remembered the shape of loss, the Memorial Day with flowers and mud. He placed one small photograph away from arrest. The image of his mother at the gas station that night, badge hidden by a coat, face drawn and human. Under it he put a caption that was not an accusation, but a question. Who pays when we choose safety over life? People came. They read the captions, they stood in silence, they argued softly, and then some left feeling lighter, and other families heavier. They did not solve the town's moral calculus, but the exhibit made a space to look and to reckon. Daniel saw his work as a form of responsibility, an honest attempt to hold both grief and culpability in the same frame. He kept photographing. The camera had been a refuge and became a way to speak when words felt small. He wrote essays to accompany some photos, trying to find language that did not flatten people into poles of victim or villain. He learned to place questions in the light rather than hide them in shadows. His voice changed from wanting to defend to wanting to understand, and understanding did not excuse. On an evening with rain like silver thread, Daniel returned to the river and lifted his camera. He took a photograph of the water where light caught the current and made it look like a ribbon. In that image, everything felt possible and fragile at once. The river did not ask who had caused the stones beneath to shift. It kept moving. He thought of accountability as a current now, something that would wear down false edges over time, but would not force an instant smoothing. He still held the folded paper R had given him. He still had the small recorder, its plastic case worn. He kept them not as trophies, but as reminders that truth often needed a small, brave hand to uncover it. The town would keep changing. People would keep making choices that bent other people's lives. Daniel knew he would have to keep his eyes open, keep taking pictures, and keep asking the hard questions. The end of the case was not a tidy chapter. Some names would never return in whole. Some streets would always carry the shadow of what had been lost. But a ledger once closed had been opened. And in the opening there was room for repair, for apology, for the slow work of a community learning to balance safety and justice, without treating either as a weapon. Daniel understood he would carry both the camera and the memory of his mother's choices with him. He would not let either define him completely. On a gray afternoon, he developed a new print in his darkroom, a close-up of Grace's hands as she placed a white shoe on Darius's memorial. He hung it to dry and watched the image come into being, black ink resolving into shape. In that moment, he felt both heavy and light. The photograph held grief, but it held a witness. The witness, he decided, could be enough to start. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.